All right, my friends, here we go. So, wanting to share today, as I mentioned, about my kind of testimony, if you will, when it comes to finances, to learning about money. What do you do with money? How do you manage money? All these different kinds of questions that naturally come up as you go about your life. So, I've shared this before when talking about just kind of the way that I came into or stumbled upon what I call the 7 pillars of excellence. So, if you've been listening for a while, hopefully I've never quizzed any of you guys to see if you can list the 7 pillars of excellence, but it's been a work in progress for a long time. And the 7 pillars of excellence are the 7 main areas of life that I think we're called to be responsible stewards, right? Where we're called to excellence, where we're called to multiply the things that God has given us, to be good stewards of the things that God has given us, so that we can show God at the end of our lives, similar to the parable in Matthew 25, the parable of the talents, where God says, "Good, well done, my good and faithful servants." Basically, because you've been faithful over this little bit, I'm going to bless you with an abundance, bless you with even more. And that's what I think really is a lot of the Christian life, right? We've been giving gifts spiritually, we've been giving gifts financially, we've been giving gifts in all these different areas of our lives. And I want to make sure you guys can see my Benedictine Properties mug here, since we're talking about money. And you have all these different opportunities and things that we're given, and it's like, what do you do with that? And I've discovered these things throughout my life. I think when you start when you're young, you mainly are, set in charge of your mind, body, and soul, right? Of your person. How do you, doing your homework, growing intellectually, staying physically fit, a lot of times we're playing sports as kids. And then you have your spiritual life, which is fairly obvious, right? Your prayer life, your sacraments, your avoiding sin, the lifestyle that you're living, your morality. That's kind of the starting point, right? That's kind of the starting ground of the life of excellence. And then as you get out into life, you get out into the world, you realize that you have, in my case in the Army, you have OERs, right? Officer Evaluation Reports. And I realized wow, my professional life is actually really important as well. And God has led me to this profession in being a military officer where I was at the time. And so I said, I'm sure that he wants me to be a good steward of this, right? Like if I had just, quit in Ranger School and half-assed it as a platoon leader and not cared ever, that probably wouldn't be glorifying God, right? I think we can all agree on that. We have a whole feast day for St. Joseph the Worker. We have Opus Dei, which, Ora et Labora, talking about the importance of prayer and work, right? We have to be thinking about that. We have to be thinking about how God has called us to just be our best, to put our best foot forward in everything that we do. We can obviously learn as you're reading scripture that money is important to God. Jesus and the Old Testament, they have a lot to say about how we manage our money. I actually just finished a great chapter by St. Francis de Sales that talks about money. And he gives some guidance on how to be, physically wealthy, but spiritually poor, and how we need to have a healthy detachment from wealth, a healthy detachment from material goods, from the things of this world. But at the same time, we don't have to, and I think this is something that's really, really important, because a lot of your secular Christianity critics on the internet, they like to say this. I saw a lot of this kind of comments when I was commenting on the Harrison Butker situation, right? A lot of people saying, well, I thought he was Christian. Aren't you supposed to sell everything you have and give to the poor? And it's like, yes, that was Jesus's call to some people. He didn't go around, that wasn't his first words to everyone. His first words, which they actually hate, are repent and believe in the gospel the majority of the time. Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Repentance is much more important than giving away everything that you have. But he says that we're called to different levels of poverty dependent on our station in life. Now, he also recognizes that it's easy to make excuses, like wanting to provide for your family, that can cover up actual greed, right? Or actual just love of things, or actual materialism and selfishness, right? And love of money. Where the love of money is the root of all evil. Important to note, not just that money is the root of all evil, but the love of money is the root of all evil. But I think we have this understanding as Catholics that we actually are called to be good stewards of things, right? And so I'm going to tell you today about how I came to understand this. And more importantly today, I want to talk through my story of how I came to learn and understand the fundamentals and the basics of what it means to be a good steward with your money. And not just what it means, because this isn't a theoretical one, but how you actually go about doing that. Now, again, this is going to be mostly my journey. The next episodes, we're going to talk more and more about the how that you do this. This is going to be the only thing we talk about on Seeking Excellence in perpetuity, but we will be obviously hitting on this a lot in the coming weeks. A couple weeks ago, we heard Emily's story, right? Emily was raised in a family that was pretty well off. Her dad, which we're very thankful for, worked very hard and has been pretty successful in his life. And he's been very generous with us, which I'm grateful for as well. And just like paying for dinners and took us to Florida a few years ago and different things like that, which I'm grateful for. When I was growing up, I lived in a household where my dad was a truck driver and my mom was a probation officer. First, she was kind of like a caseworker, and then she was a probation officer for the county, for Dauphin County in Pennsylvania. I don't know how much my mom made. I know it wasn't a lot, like a ton of money, somewhere I think in like the 40 to 50,000 range. And my dad at times would make over six figures. Like he was making, $90,000, $100,000 a year driving truck. But the caveat is that my dad also had a healthy amount of child support to pay because, as many of you know, I was his seventh kid by 5 different women. And so when I was, let's say, when I was growing up, I think he had 2 kids that he was paying child support for, maybe 3, throughout the bulk of my childhood. And then I think it was when I was around 14 that he didn't have to pay child support anymore. Now, my dad was very interesting with his money. He was somebody who very prone to spending. My mom actually a little bit more prone to saving, but was very prone to spending when it came to me. And I'm grateful for all the things that I had. I had a lot of new clothes. I usually had video games and all the things, and was able to play sports and have new basketball shoes every year and all that kind of stuff. But we definitely were not, I was never shown any type of actual financial discipline. And even further, even on top of that, I was never shown any type of financial wisdom or financial literacy in the home either. I think I remember going through, like, it's kind of funny to think about that. Like in grade school back in the day, we actually used to learn how to balance a checkbook, and we had to like sit down and balance a fake checkbook. And I remember my mom kind of doing it for our family or for hers, because I do know now that my parents, while they were married, always had separate finances. So maybe my mom was just paying bills or balancing her checkbook. Like I have some memories of that, like on Sundays or something, like my mom sitting down at the table and doing those things. But one thing that I think is really important, is going to be a huge part of this Crankfield family, is going to be tying the children into some of our financial decisions to understand my logic and reasoning on why I make certain decisions. How do I balance out and weigh our possibility for buying a new car? How do I make decisions on what we can afford for vacation or different things like that, right? Being very transparent about those things, I think, is really important, because it's how you can teach them the things that you know. So going back to my dad, he was the type of person that, like, he would come home, we'd be on like all in the same phone bill, and he would like get a new phone number and a new phone with a totally different carrier, right? Like he would come home and switch up our Verizon with like a Boost mobile plan, and we'd end up all paying more for our phone bills. He would just like suddenly decide he's going to get a new car with a really high car payment and rack up credit card debt and different things like that. Like there was just like no structure or plan in the house that I grew up in when it came to finances. And when my parents were on and off, when I was about 10 to 13-ish, 14, my mom was very stressed about money. It was like the biggest concern. And even when they were together, a lot of times money was a stress and an argument. I think largely because of the fact that there was no plan, there was no structure, there was no vision, there was no guidance, there was no wisdom or literacy in what we were actually doing financially, which I come to find out as I grow up that that's what most people do, right? Like most people don't have an actual giving plan. Most people don't have a plan for what they're doing with their money. They don't have a plan for rainy days. They don't have an emergency fund, or a lot of the things and a lot of the fundamentals that Dave Ramsey shares are so impactful, even though they're so basic, because so few people are doing anything even remotely close to the basics. And so that was really my experience growing up. And then I had just seen my dad. He had all the bad tendencies. And one of the things that I really remember about my dad, which I never understood and didn't really like, was my dad would go on these long, which I kind of understand actually. No, to be fair, because I do something somewhat similar. but in a very different way, which I'm going to explain. So my dad was a very big dreamer. He would go on these rants on a somewhat regular basis about what he would do if we won the lottery. You know how there's always the billboards of the Powerball and it's like it's at $500 million or whatever? Like my dad was the kind of guy that every time we saw one of those billboards, the next 15 minutes in the car, sometimes longer, would be him ranting and dreaming about all the things he would do if he won the lottery. The other thing that I found really interesting, and I've talked about this a little bit before about my dad, is my dad would always brag about his knowledge and how much he reads. Now, I thought it was kind of annoying when I was a teenager, but you think most things are annoying as a teenager. What I came to understand and find out later was my dad, I knew this at the time, but it hit me why it was annoying to me later in life. My dad was reading a lot. But he would read things like the National Geographic, the Daily News, things of this nature. He was not reading Dave Ramsey. He was not reading business books. He was not reading finance books or marriage books or spiritual books. All the things that I like to read, right? So my dad can tell you random facts about space and all the horrific, for whatever reason, violent news stories that have happened in the last month. But if you asked him, hey, I just got $10,000. What can I do with this $10,000 so that I have $50,000 in 5, 10, 20 years? From my understanding, his answer would be, I have no idea. And I think that just shows like a really practical difference that really struck me as I'm discovering. I took you guys kind of on the speed journey of how I came to discover these 7 pillars over time, that my dad pursued a lot of knowledge in his life, a lot of facts, but not a lot of wisdom. And I don't say this, I hope this is understood, because I know I'm really bashing on my dad to an extent here. This isn't like an anti-dad. I don't hold any animosity towards him about this. But I say this because I think that a lot of people do this in their lives. And I even rail against and speak against Catholics who do this by obsessing over theology. And if you're a Catholic husband and father, and one of your major roles and responsibilities is providing, yes, you should put St. Thomas Aquinas down and pick up Dave Ramsey every now and then. You know, like this kind of stuff is important because you're going to find yourself in this same situation where your son may say, yeah, my dad could tell you and answer any random question you have about theology, things that were very not practical and theoretical and that only theology nerds care about. But he couldn't tell you how to the best way to pay off your student loan debt. And he encouraged me to go and incur a bunch of debt in order to go to college. Like those kinds of things are going to stick out. And when you're remembered as a father, this is the kind of stuff you want to try to clean up, I think, from generation to generation. Being a man who seeks wisdom so as to live an excellent, holy life, to be a good steward with the things that God has given you, not just somebody, and you can still have your hobbies on top of that, but you have responsibilities and then you have hobbies. You don't have hobbies and then responsibilities, right? And so I'm not mad at my dad for watching the Discovery Channel constantly. I'm confused why he spent so much time watching the Discovery Channel and never going to church, right? So it's just a matter of priorities, you know? Like you had time for 4 hours of Discovery Channel on Sunday, but not time to go to church on Sunday. And church is an interesting example given what I just said about theology. You also can like overdo spiritualizing everything, I think, as a layman, because you're not a monk. Like if you wanted to just have everything in your life be spiritual and theological, we have vocations for that. Like there's a path that you actually can take to do that, where your whole life is the church, your whole life is theology. That exists. But what it is not is your husband and father trying to mimic the life of a monk, right? So anyways, I'm watching all this as I'm growing up. And I get into college and I really experienced this sense of financial freedom from my dad when I was in college because I felt really controlled by him when it came to money. And this is something that I think a lot of people in our family on my dad's side were kind of prone to, is thinking, well, I can't piss off my granddad or my dad or whatever, you know, my husband or ex-husband, whatever he was to all these different people who he gave money to. I think he always saw his financial abundance because he truly did have a lot of money. I mean, he was, to imagine this is like so mind blowing to me based on my current living situation where my mortgage is almost as much money, if not more money, than I was making out of college. My mortgage today, when I became a husband and a father, is more money than I think my starting salary as a second lieutenant in a year. My dad was making more money while my mom was working. My dad was making more money than our house was worth. Now, he was a contractor, basically a 1099 for being a truck driver. So he obviously, I don't know what his tax situation is. I don't even want to know tax situation or whatever, but still a good amount of money. I can't even imagine, guys, if I was making 3/4 of what our house is worth in my annual income, you can't even imagine how much money I would have in 30 to 40 years, right? Like it would just be unreal. The things that I would be doing to multiply that amount of money because my monthly mortgage payment would be such a low percentage of my income. And yet both of my parents found themselves over time going further and further into debt and struggling financially in different ways. And it was largely due to bad financial decisions, is my belief. Now, I don't know the full story, and this isn't, again, anything to bash my parents, but I'm just talking about what I grew up around and where I was, because the main thing I think happens a lot of times when it comes to money and financial literacy, and why I want this to be kind of an excuse remover, is that most people say, well, I was never taught, right? That's always the excuse you hear. Why didn't they teach us this in high school? Why didn't they teach us this in college? Why didn't they teach us this at home? I don't know why. And they should have in all of those places probably, but they didn't. And now it's your responsibility. So I tell you all these things, not to bash my parents and make them look bad. I tell you all these things because you have to own up to what you don't know. And you have to embrace and own your own ignorance. Now, I remember one of my first financial decisions I had to make my grandparents, who were also very generous with me throughout my life. Grandmother, I was always told by my mom that Nana was really, really smart with money. She was really, really smart with money. She invests in stocks and she's really, really smart with money. Now, my grandparents had bought me some stocks when I was a baby, put, a few $1,000s in that ended up being tens of $1,000s by the time I was 30, which I'm incredibly grateful for. And they've been very generous with me throughout the years, whether that's helping my mom out sometimes. I don't know how much that happened. I know they bought me a lot of things, so very generous gifts. I lived with them a lot of times over the summers for, several days a week. But they were very, very kind and very helpful with me and a lot of other family members because they were diligent. And my grandfather was a retired 06 in the Army, a retired colonel. And so they had his pension. And my grandmother did invest. She bought stocks. Now, she taught me a little bit as I was getting out of high school and into college and starting to get more curious about these things. But it still was something I feel like, from what I recall, that I had to somewhat pursue. Now, as I was getting into the Army, they got a little bit more hands-on, where they were like, hey, you need to set up a will, and you need to do this, and you should invest in your thrift savings plan, and all these different things, which was somewhat helpful, or you should continue to put money in your Vanguard account, which they had set up for me a long time ago. And it was helpful. I wouldn't say that they got me to the place where I needed to be necessarily, but it was a good starting point and kind of getting me kicked off. Now, I am the kind of person, as I just mentioned, that believes it was not their responsibility to teach me every single thing. They had the responsibility. They really don't. I mean, your grandparents don't really have any responsibility. I think anything that a grandparent does really is a bonus. Your parents have responsibility to teach you and to form you in these things. But most of our parents did not. And so what do? So I get into college. Again, this is my first kind of financial decision I had to make. My grandparents, who have been very generous with me, they told me that because I had hit Dean's List every semester, they had given me my car that I had fresh out when I was in high school. My grandmother gave me her Cadillac, her 1992 Cadillac DeVille, which I absolutely loved. My friends loved. It was amazing. It was the best first car imaginable. My grandmother let me have it. And then I got to take it to college. Got a ton of parking tickets with it at college. And then when I was graduating college, they were like, hey, you made Dean's List every semester. They had a Dodge Dart. They had two cars at the time. A Dodge Dart and like a RAV4 or something like that. It was a 2013 silver Dodge Dart. And I didn't love it, to be honest. I thought it was like really tiny. It was like this really tiny sedan, but it was nice. It had like heated seats, a remote start, and they always bought nice versions of cars. And so they were like, you made Dean's List. You're going into the Army. They were super proud. They were like, you can have the Dart if you want. And I said, absolutely, I'll take it. Now, this happened probably my junior year, going into senior year or something like that. My senior year, I still remember this. My dad called me and was trying to sell me his, like, he had like a Kia Sorento or something like that. I don't even know if I know what a Sorento is, but basically the Kia version of the RAV4, right? Like the kind of crossover SUV. I can't even imagine what his deal was. And I didn't know anything about APR, car loans, payments. I didn't know anything at the time, right? So I didn't even know the right questions to ask. But he was basically trying to sell me that I would take over his car loan for that car and he would go out and get a new car. Now, mind you, if you know anything about money now, you can understand how either stupid or malicious it is to try to sell your 21-year-old son who's just about to graduate college with like $500 to his name. He has a paid off car that's 2 years old with like 10,000 miles on it. And you're trying to sell him your 4-year-old car to take on payments that has 30,000 miles, let's say. You know what I mean? Like truly trying to like push this on me and sell this to me. And I'm like, I'm not a financial, I'm no Dave Ramsey. I didn't even know who Dave Ramsey was at the time. But I'm like, this seems like some bad math, dude. Why am I going to take over your car payment when I currently don't have a car payment and I'm driving a newer car than you? It's this kind of stuff that you just start to see and you're like, okay. That was probably the first time where it seemed like, okay, not only did you not set me up for any type of financial success as far as teaching me anything or like, I didn't ask him to pay for my college or anything like that. I had an ROTC scholarship, which is when, like I mentioned earlier, I felt like I had this financial freedom from him when I got my ROTC scholarship. This was the first time where I was like, okay, now you're like actively sabotaging my finances. And I didn't even know at the time how bad of a deal it was, right? But I look back on it now and I'm just like, that was either super dumb or super malicious. I don't know which of the two it was, but I can't think of a third option. So anyways, I'm getting out of college. And as I mentioned before, I get out of college and I spend some money buying some of the things on our packing list or like the list of things we needed for the Army. And so I go down literally to Fort Benning, Georgia, and I have like $350 in my checking account. And we had another $1,000, let's say, of equipment we were supposed to buy in order to start our work. But we didn't get paid for like 5 weeks after we started. So we're supposed to have all this stuff going in, but we don't get paid for another 5 or 6 weeks. Mind you, earlier this year, I spent like $1,000 bailing my brother out of jail when he got arrested for driving without a license because he had a suspended license for like a decade after going to prison and all this different thing. So I have like no money. Also went on a mission trip to Nicaragua, and I think, I paid for that with my grandparents or somebody else, kind of raising money for it, and probably gave some of the money there, right? Like I was just riding low. So I was like, I barely have money for groceries. Luckily back then, groceries didn't cost you $200 a week. But I'm like, dude, I literally have no money, right? And so I am getting there, and luckily USAA had this loan program for new officers where you could get up to like $25,000 in a loan, which a lot of lieutenants went out and bought new cars with. And I think you got like a 0% interest rate or something like that. It was something crazy, like a 0% interest rate for like 3 years or something, $25,000, only available to like new Army officers or military officers, I should say, because it was USAA. So I'm like, I got to apply for this loan. So I apply for this loan. I get it, in a day or two. And suddenly, thanks be to God, I had this like hesitation where I was like, I don't need $20,000. So I was like, I probably shouldn't pull out $20,000. And it's amazing to me as I've learned more and more about money over the years, like a lot of it is just kind of common sense, delayed gratification, and not being an emotional decision maker, right? Like if I could boil it down to like 3 things that can help you to at least not F up your life financially, it would probably be those 3 things, right? If you can have some delayed gratification, you can reason, you cannot be an emotional decision maker. You can kind of keep yourself out of any like massive mess. So here I am, getting this $10,000, and I was like, wow, that's a lot of money. I remember just looking at it and I was like, every time I'd open my bank account, I'd be like, I have $10,000, which now is really funny to think about how that like meant so much to me at the time. Because most times now I have $10,000 in some form or fashion available to me, right? But anyways, so I finally have this $10,000, and I'm able to kind of cover my expenses, cover my basic needs. Now over the next year, because of my training, we were in the field a lot. We were going through, all our IBOLIC stuff, and I was living on base, so my rent was probably $400 a month or something like that, split between me and Bob for our like 2-bedroom townhouse that we had there in Fort Benning, Georgia, God's country. And then I went to Ranger School, and I was in Ranger School by the grace of God for like 5 months. So you're saving money throughout all of this, right? I'm just like racking up on stacking up stacks, And so I have a ton of cash when I get out of Ranger School. I'm talking like a year ago I had $10,000 and I thought that was a ton. I paid the $10,000 back and now I have like $22,000 when I get out of Ranger School, because you think about it, I'm making probably $45,000 a year, 42 as a second lieutenant, something around there. And I had I was paying $400 a month in rent and I had no other expenses. And so I'm literally gone for 5 months, let's say, and all of my money I'm just saving up. And I wasn't spending a ton in the months leading up to that either. So now I'm like a year in and I have at least like 6 months where I literally didn't like pay anything and wasn't charging anything, wasn't spending, wasn't doing anything. I do all of this and I have like $20,000 getting out of Ranger School. I remember I go home after Ranger School before I'm going up to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, when I PCS'd up there. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to go test drive a Mustang. All these other guys are getting new cars, they're doing all this cool stuff. I'm like, I make the same amount of money as them. I can afford it. And so I go test drive this Mustang, and I'm with this young, cool dude, car salesman. I take 2 of my friends with me. We go, I'm pounding this Mustang on this test drive. This is like right when they switched test drives where you didn't have to go with the person, which was super hype. And I'm just flooring this Mustang on I-81. And I'm like, this is amazing. Like, you should buy it. You should buy it. You should buy it. Luckily, I go back and I'm like, let me just think about it for a little while. And so I go home, think about it, and I'm like, I definitely don't need a new Mustang. I don't have a car payment. Why would I want to, pay $400 a month? And I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to negotiate. I don't know anything about percentages. Let's just hold off for now. So I avoid this massive financial mess that could have been me owning a Mustang at 23 years old. Probably crashing it on I-95, driving from Fort Bragg to Pennsylvania on the many trips that I took, which would have been a tragedy. There could be no doubt about it. So then, anyways, I get back to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I did splurge on one thing, which was I went nuts at Men's Warehouse, right? So I get to Men's Warehouse and I just spent like $1,500, $2,000. I bought I think I got like 2 new suits. I got 2 sports jackets, got some new shirts. Now, the great thing is I still own several of those to this day. Now, I'm not the same body type I was when I was 23, but we're not too terribly off, And so I still have some of them that I can still fit in, but good use of money because I really didn't have any really like nice dress clothes at the time. So I got my new suits, I got my little splurge, and life is good. Life is like we're doing well. But I was really praying to the Lord because one of the things that kind of happened to me, and this is getting into a phase of my life I've never really shared about before. Only very, very briefly. I want to do a whole podcast episode on this topic. And that podcast will not be today. But I was praying to the Lord on something that I heard when we were getting ready for Ranger School. Actually, no, it wasn't ready for Ranger School. It was like our last couple days. They bring you back to Fort Benning from Florida after you finish swamp phase. And you have like this kind of fattening week, they always call it, because you're like emaciated by the end of Ranger School. So they let you just absolutely feast for like 3 or 4 days so you don't look like you were just abused for 62 days, which you more or less were. And so during this time phase, they're also kind of giving you some like mental health tips and just like some next steps in your career. And one of the best pieces of advice I think we heard there at Fort Benning was a lot of guys get depressed after they get done with Ranger School. And you're sitting there thinking to yourself, like, how can I be depressed? I just graduated from Ranger School. I just did the coolest thing, my greatest accomplishment of my life up to this point. And they made this good point that a lot of guys for years, some, I mean, you can think about it, like some guys have gone multiple times. It's been years like consuming their life. And they've had this massive goal, this massive target, which was awesome to shoot for. You're very driven and motivated young guys. And now it's like, now what? What do I do with my life from here, right? You kind of have hit this pinnacle where it's like, I've accomplished so much. I've done the thing that I've been so focused on for so long. What do I do from here? It's this kind of idea. Simon Sinek gets into this with business of the finite versus the infinite game. What are you really striving for? Do you have something that is helping you to keep going that you're constantly pursuing? Or are you solely focused on just this one thing, right? And just winning and just one accomplishment that like once you reach that, it's like, well, now what do I do? And so I really appreciated that. So I was getting out of Ranger School and I'm like, all right, Lord, like what's my next thing? Maybe it's just my career in the Army, but I was like, I feel like I have to have like something else. Like what else am I supposed to be pursuing? Like what's my next big goal? And so I meet this guy, and this to me, I gotta tell you kind of the full story of how the long story short of it is I got into network marketing. I want to tell you the story of how I met the guy and how it did really feel very much like a godsend to me at the time. And I still look back on it and think that it was a godsend. I don't regret that I was involved in it for a little while. I regret how long I was involved in it because I think that it was largely BS. But let me explain. So I'm praying to God literally about, Lord, what's next? And I had just bought all these suits and all these things. And I didn't really have a good use for the suits. I just bought them because I felt like I wanted to have suits because I was a grown man. And I literally didn't like have a suit that fit. And so I think I bought like a black, a navy, and a gray suit. And then I bought these 2 dope sports jackets as well. And then a couple shirts and stuff. I remember I'm big on personal development at this time in my life, as you can imagine, because I always have been, right? But I really was coming out of college. I was really kind of going through the same mindset shift that I was just talking about, of realizing like my dad was big on knowledge, but not wisdom. I wanted to be growing personally as best I can. So I'm like going through, I had already read like 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, How to Win Friends and Influence People, like all these different things. And so I think I'm reading 7 Habits for the second time. Or no, you know what I was reading? I was reading The 8th Habit, which is the sequel to 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And The 8th Habit super sucks. That book sucks, dude. I don't know what Stephen Covey was doing. He wrote an amazing, amazing book, followed it by just hot trash. I don't know if he was just like trying to make money or what. I went to the, not the dining hall, but like what did we used to call it? It's not the commissary. Like the kind of, it's kind of like this big gas station. And then you also had like restaurants attached to it. So you had like Popeyes, Subway, different things like that, right? So a lot of people went there for lunchtime. And so I go there for lunch one day and I'm like, I'm going to read during lunch. And I brought my book and I had eaten my lunch. And I literally sat there and was like too embarrassed to be sitting there like reading in front of, like I'm like the only nerd that's sitting here like reading a book, right? While eating lunch instead of like hanging out with people or just like scrolling your phone or whatever people do. And so I go home, I go back to work and go home. And I was like kicking myself that night because I was like, I can't believe that you would let other people's opinion of you prevent you from growing, right? Like, that you're the type of person that your personal growth is most important to you. So why would you let other people's opinion of you keep you from growing and keep you from doing what you're supposed to do? So I'm kind of feeling all this, right? And I'm like, tomorrow you're going to go during lunch and you're going to read at that table. So I go back the next day and I'm reading at lunch. And this guy comes up to me. His name was Tyler. If I know there's a few people listening to the podcast who are going to know who he is. Tyler comes up to me and he says, "What are you reading? How do you like your book? Or do you enjoy the book? Whatever." And he had read 7 Habits, of course. And I tell him, "You know what? Honestly, I think this book sucks." I said, "I really like the first one, but this one's terrible." And we get into this conversation and he's telling me about these kind of financial gurus that he knows, these mentors of his who are financially free, and the whole spiel. If you've ever gotten the Amway spiel from some of these like subcategories, we were in Brit Worldwide, but you have other different kind of subcategories of there's like Worldwide, and there's all these different like teams within the Amway Corporation. So he's giving me this whole spiel, the kind of pitch. We used to call it telling our story, sharing your story. So he's basically sharing the story with me, and I'm biting all over, right? I'm super eager, I'm like your ideal guy, right? I'm all about personal development, personal growth. This was a largely Christian group. I'm, super into my faith, even though to him I was kind of a heretic because I was Catholic. He didn't bring it up the first time, although he did try to deconvert me a few times over the years, which is something we can get into another time. But anyways, he tells me, he gets my number, we kind of stay in touch. Now I'm thinking, this is my next thing as we go through this process, right? It's like a 6-step process. And as we're kind of going through this, I'm like, this is what I'm called to do. Now, mind you, I still have this like $18,000 in my bank account, just about to get a promotion to first lieutenant, which comes with a pay bump. You get a pay bump at the end of every year. And I'm like, what do I do with this money? Right? Like, I'm just like, for the first time in my life, I actually have a good amount of money, and this isn't a loan, right? I have $20,000 cash, and I'm still making, $4,000, $4,500 a month. You're not getting taxed a ton, and you have your BAH, your housing allowance, and all these different things as an officer. And I'm like, what do I do with this money, right? Like, I don't want to end up, when I get married, and I hope to get married in the next 5 years, I don't want to be stressed and frustrated and arguing with my wife about money all the time. So I'm like, what am I supposed to do? So I meet this guy as I'm praying about, God, what's my next adventure, right? And so it seemed to me to be very timely. And the first book he had me read was a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I still remember going to pick it up. I remember texting him when I picked up this very copy of the book when I was 20. I would have been 23 at the time, maybe 24. No, I was 23. So I was just a young buck. And I was reading all these different things. And it just, I mean, it blew my mind. I know a lot of people and a lot of financial gurus that I hear about today, they'll tell you that chapter 1 is amazing. I've heard some people say that chapter 1 is amazing, and then everything after that is just kind of BS. And there's a good amount of BS in Robert Kiyosaki in general, right? The second book they had me read was another Robert Kiyosaki book, and that book I think was just a money grab for him. And he was talking about how great network marketing is, even though he never himself did any network marketing. But it was called Business in the 21st Century, and it was all about how the strength of your network is everything, which I now have a totally and utterly different perspective on, and understanding of what an actual like healthy, high value, high net worth network is and what it means. But these first 60 pages, guys, I mean, I'm not saying and debunking that everything else in this book is bad. I honestly think the whole book is worth reading. Just because the biggest thing of this book, and this is what set me on fire. So I got this one, then I was reading Tony Robbins, and then I was reading Ray Dalio, and then I was reading all these different, I'm just looking up best personal finance books, investment books, personal growth. And the long story short, so to kind of wrap this up, because this kind of is the crux of it, right? And how I kind of went from my journey of being a kid that was taught nothing about money almost to, and shown a lot of bad habits, to really transforming that. Network marketing was a huge part of that for me because of the fact that we were in a very extensive network marketing program, if you will, where we budgeted every month and we were supposed to submit our budget to, which is, I mean, it was kind of cultish, and I can get into that when we get into the podcast on it. It was very controlling, which I did not like. And I was not very good at adhering to the very controlling rules, as you can probably imagine. But just being taught the fundamentals, the basics of budgeting, a lot of Dave Ramsey principles, being taught just the importance of investing and how to help your money to make money for you. Now, I think their application of a lot of the things was wrong, but their theory and the philosophy was very, very sound and very good, and has been very helpful for me for the rest of my life. And so what I view this as is like, no, I don't think that God wanted me to be a diamond, a double diamond in the worldwide system of Amway. But I do think that God wanted me to kind of save me from myself. I just came across this quote as I was just scrolling through here, where Robert Kiyosaki says the main cause, there's this quote from his Rich Dad that says the main cause of poverty and financial struggle is fear and ignorance. Now, if you're somebody that's super, and it says not the economy or the government or the rich. Now, if you are somebody that's super, super woke, you probably don't listen to this podcast. But if you are somebody that thinks that like poverty and being poor is always the fault of other things and external circumstances, you're not going to like this book. This book is basically a financial version of Extreme Ownership and gives you kind of a pathway forward to start to see things differently, to start to understand that poor people view their car as an asset where rich people do not, right? This breakdown and his explanation of how assets are things that bring in money, liabilities are things that cost money, right? And so just this kind of switch in mind about like, it's not how much money you make, it's how much money you keep. And just the basic tenets of investing, right? The history of taxes. There's all these really, really great chapters in here. It's sold many, many copies. It says #1 personal finance book of all time, bestseller. I'd encourage you to read it. It's a very quick and short read. And if you've never read anything about it, if you have any drive, it's going to set a fire in you to want to learn more about this stuff, because you start to understand this stuff is incredibly freaking exciting. Basically, what he taught me, something that I didn't believe before, was, wait, it's not the government's fault or racism's fault or anything else's fault if I don't end up wealthy at the end of my life. It would just be my fault. And there's this beauty, and the network marketing, they had all their little slogans like, if it's meant to be, it's up to me, and all these different things. Now, there's a way to merge a lot of this financial philosophy that they had, I think, with Catholic teaching, which is what I've strived to do in my life, right? Take the good and leave the bad. Because there was a lot of prosperity gospel and things like that. This assumption that God wants all of us to be rich and thrive, and basically we're supposed to have heaven on earth. which I don't believe, but you can mix the two to understand that, okay, I have a lot of autonomy and control over what happens to me in my life, but I'm called to surrender and be open to whatever God's will is for my life. And I'm not meant to control my life in that I tell God what I'm going to do, but I am meant to take sound wisdom, be prudent, be temperate in the gifts. Going back to what I started this entire conversation with, this entire podcast with, I am called to take those things that I've been given, gather through my mind, body, and soul, strong morality, a strong spirit, a strong conscience by the grace of God, sharpen my mind and my body to be able to spot and see good opportunities and decisions, to be able to make good decisions, and then be able to work hard and be fruitful in the opportunities and gifts that God has given me, right? That's how I view it. And I feel like this really did help me to start to understand that, because the first thing that I had to do was say, I'm not a victim to my circumstances. I'm not a victim because of my skin color. I'm actually able, if it be God's will, to be wealthy at the end of my life. And if I'm not called to be wealthy at the end of my life, so be it. Don't let it be on behalf of my ignorance, my sloth, my gluttony, my greed. Let that not be the reason. Because one of the things, and my final thing that I'll share with you is, I forgot to mention that along this journey, I had been on 4 mission trips throughout my 4 years of college, 3 to the Dominican Republic, 1 to Nicaragua, in Managua, and we were kind of serving the wealthy there. I learned a ton through those experiences. And the one thing that I really felt like I took away, and even more took away when I went to Afghanistan in 2017 on deployment, was we have a lot of opportunity here in the United States of America that people abroad just do not have. And I can utilize my platform here to try to share the things that I've learned with people who are here in the US that have opportunity, and they can take advantage of that opportunity themselves. But I ought to make as much money as I can to provide more opportunity, especially for kids here in the US and for people abroad who simply don't have the opportunity because of oppression and different things happening. Like true oppression, right? If you're in the Dominican Republic, you don't get to just like study hard and get a full scholarship to college. The things that the opportunities that are available to our top 80% are available to their top 5%, which are available to the top 0.001% in Afghanistan, right? So like the level that you have to absolutely crush it to even just have an upper middle class life in these other countries is unbelievable, right? And a lot of times in Afghanistan, it's genuinely impossible, right? In some of these places, in a place like Haiti, right? Like there's just too much instability. There's a lot of issues there. But I feel that we're called to be good stewards of the things that we have, which includes not overspending and being zealous in our greed and materialism, but to accumulate wealth so that we can pay for abortion pill reversals. We can pay for all the good causes, all the things, the evangelization efforts of the church, all these different things that we're called to do, and obviously provide opportunity for our family and for each other to have a better life, to provide jobs to other people, to do these things that I think are inherently really, really good in the best parts of capitalism that help alleviate poverty. We're called to be good stewards of the things that God's given us so that we can create more opportunity for other people, and then we can bless other people with the things that we have. This isn't just about like, let's be financially good stewards so we can have, fancy cars and go on baller vacations. That's not the point. The point is that you've been given a profession, a vocation, opportunity, money, and a mind that's capable of immense amounts of knowledge, a body that's capable of immense amounts of hard work. And a lot of us just are apathetic and we're not really working hard. We're not really pushing ourselves. And so that's going to be a lot of what next week's podcast is going to be about. If you enjoyed today's episode, I encourage you to join us on YouTube, where you can watch these in video format. I love having you on video. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Seeking Excellence. More importantly, if you want to become a supporter of this channel so I can continue to make content like this, because I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. If we don't hit 100 supporters at $10 a month or more by September 1st, it's likely that we're not going to be doing the Seeking Excellence podcast anymore. Almost more than it's a financial thing, it's a principle thing. Do 100 people actually believe in what we're doing here enough to want to contribute $10 a month? And so I encourage you and invite you over to join us on Locals, seekingexcellence.locals.com. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in today. It's been a blessing to be with you. God bless you. We'll see you next time.